Hello, all of you beautiful people. Jules here for WhatCulture.com. And you know what? When it came to penning this series, gluttony was always the sin that I was the least looking forward to covering, as figuring out how best to approach it within the confines of looking at the video game industry was actually much more complicated than it might first appear. And the key part was distinguishing it from greed, which can be thought of as a purely selfish desire for more than is needed. But gluttony is nearly solely focused on the act of eating to excess. Now, within the scope of this series, it would be easy for me to just pull examples from my dirty bag of tricks and point the finger at the times that the video game publishers, developers, and even outsider forces within the industry glut themselves on our hard-earned money. And while that would be tempting, I've tried my best to focus on examples of excess in other areas within the industry to try and distinguish the two. And trust me, video games thrive on excess. So let me indulge you again as we once travel to the very pits of hell. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and this is 7 Deadly Sins, Gluttony. Number 7. Overpriced and overpowered special editions. When it comes to selling video games, publishers know that they have to get their hooks in early. It used to be back in the day that promotional campaigns, TV ads, and maybe even a rare appearance on a demo disc would be just enough to see that cash flying from our wallets on payday for these new releases. However, with markets being as crowded as they are now, more and more focus has been put on paying for a game that not only doesn't exist right now, but might, in the case of early access titles, still be in the process of being put together. Another way to score that pay dirt early is to offer an early bird special to all of us worms in the form of special editions and pre-orders. By incentivizing spending before a game is even out, publishers make back some of their investment costs. Yet, as the costs of AAA video games is ever spiraling out of control, this can force some developers to make some rather questionable decisions when getting people to pre-order. Obviously, we have all of the mountain of tat that I'm pretty sure makes up the plastic beach that gorillas were always singing about, from steel cases and collector's coins to bobbleheads and other junk that no one really needs. But the more egregious examples of excess come in the form of overpowered pre-orders. Some games award players who part with their cash early weapons and items that utterly break the early game experience, rewarding players for their overindulgence with yet more overindulgence. It could be weapons such as in State of Decay that doled out pretty high-tier equipment which ruined the early difficulty curve, or fat stacks of in-game cash to purchase whatever you want. Either way, gluttony is rewarded on both sides of the coin here. We line their pockets and they line ours with air quotes, sweet loot. Number 6. Excessive amounts of DLC in titles. Now, I know this is looking like it's steering directly into another rant about the greed of video game developers, and quite frankly, it kind of is, but there is a subtle distinction that I'm going to make between the concept of microtransactions itself and the sheer amount of microtransactions that some games implement. Now, on the whole, microtransactions could be viewed as purely greedy, a way to siphon off video game content and then sell it back to us. Worryingly, it's become so commonplace nowadays that we barely even kick up a fuss anymore, and we seem to have accepted this as the new and pretty grim normality. However, some video game developers aren't simply happy with that few extra quid that they can scalp from our wallets and have to take things too far, which leads me to talking about microtransactions as a form of gluttony, and also allows me to talk about Dead or Alive 6. This game is genuinely stunning in its approach to portion control, in that it has precisely f*** all, boasting a whopping 460 pieces of DLC on Steam and more on the way, which thankfully is meant to be its final serving. It's as if the developers found a pricing gun label maker and decided that everything was up for grabs. As you might expect, the majority of this is absolute garbage, focusing on skimpy outfits for all the fighters and even having the gall to charge you money to change your character's hairstyle, and again, if you want to change it back. It's mind-blowing how much this game has been torn to shreds only to be sold back to you in small doses. On top of the £55 going rate on Steam for this full game, all of the DLC and the season passes, which by the way are more expensive than the actual base game itself, would cost you over £1,800. Absolutely abysmal. Number 5. Crunch development cycles. Nothing screams "give me more" louder and more aggressively than the quite frankly sickening practice of crunch development cycles. These periods of overworking staff to the point of mental breakdowns demand more time, more resources, more of your very soul, all to meet deadlines. Now I know the more cynical among us might hear me say this and say, "Oh well, a deadline is a deadline, you wouldn't complain if this was any other industry, etc, etc." But you know what, I must insert 2 points into that line of thinking. One, just because staying late for no pay happens in a lot of other jobs, especially the service industry, does not excuse how entirely shitty that practice is. And two, not many other industries have actively prevented their staff from speaking out about being overworked and not receiving any form of compensation on public social media platforms. The sheer act of trying to silence those who would speak out, either through peer pressure or company guidelines, meant that when the lid finally did blow off, it led to an outpour of developers sharing harrowing stories of what they went through. These people, they make our favorite titles, they bring our fantasies to life, and yet, thanks to deadlines decided often outside of their control, they sometimes are forced to work for weeks, months even, at levels far above the stress that we endure in other jobs. And this is to say nothing of the awful, gluttonous practices shown by the likes of, Gearbox, who recently were outed as having promised bonuses to staff upon completing a rough development period for Borderlands 3, and then not delivering on this. To work your staff ragged is one thing, but then to keep the dragon's share of the bonuses back afterwards? Well, that's plain gluttony. Number 4. Overcrowded, underregulated video game markets. As I have said in multiple different incarnations, the mobile video game market is a lawless Wild West. One need only cast a cursory glance over it to see rampant issues that are, for the most part, not only being ignored, but almost actively encouraged. Shovelware titles are 10 a penny, boasting artificially inflated review scores and populated with bots which have provided generic regurgitations of praise for games which are asset flip trash at best and incredulous examples of copyright infringement at worst. Even if we ignore the rampant cash-grabbing antics of publishers milking their own IPs dry, hello, Final Fantasy or the Bravest, there are so many other examples of rip-off games looking to do even worse. This market acts like those straight-to-DVD videos with titles just similar enough to well-known flicks that they hope to con people into buying them. The sheer glut of video games of this ilk that go unpunished is astounding, and for every piss-weak attempt by those in charge of the platform to remove egregious garbage, 10 more sprout up in its place. It's like trying to fight fire by shoveling coal onto it in the hopes of burying the problem. Number 3. Bigger publishers absorbing smaller teams. When it comes to being absolute gluttons, you need only look above your head to the giant salivating jaws of companies like EA and Activision, which constantly rake the globe looking not only for your cash at every given turn, but also new sources of originality to swallow whole and absorb into the greater mass of their companies. EA especially loved this practice back in the day, buying out smaller dev teams, which acted as a twofold win for them. Firstly, they squashed any competition by literally adding it to their own ranks, and secondly, they could then strip out the parts and then close the studios in question while keeping all of their IPs. Origin Studios, Maxis, Bullfrog Productions, Westwood Studios, Black Box Games, Playfish, and Visceral Games all were gobbled up and spat out by EA once they had got their fill. It is a clear case of digesting and regurgitating other developers' work with the EA logo slapped all about the place. And in their move to consolidate the market, it is hard not to feel sick to your stomach when you see once proud developers putting out titles with the hallmarks of microtransactions or surprise mechanics that EA is now so infamous for. Number 2. Esports match fixing. It might sound like a horrific understatement, but esports are absolutely huge at the moment. Over the last few years, online tournaments and global video game sporting events have absolutely exploded in popularity, drawing the eye of mainstream media, lucrative sponsorships, and millions of players either looking to see their favorites battle it out on grandiose settings or vie for position themselves to be the top of the digital dogpile. However, as you might expect, as soon as there's money involved on a platform, platform, you're going to find people trying to exploit the system for personal gain. While the glitz and glamour of the main stage is what is promoted to the public, behind this facade are tales of kids dropping out of school to join what could only be described as gaming gyms, being tasked with playing the same game over and over for hours, weeks, months, just to get them up to scratch to join a well-known team. And these long, thankless hours have led to players suffering from mental breakdowns or completely isolating themselves from their friends and families to the further detriment of their health. Another dark aspect of the esports industry is the ever-increasing cases of match fixing, where solo players or competitive teams will bet on themselves and then purposely throw the matches in order to make millions. A recent case in August 2019 centered around a group of CSGO players who now, thanks to their gluttony, may face up to 10 years in prison each for match fixing. Esports events, on paper, should be transparent examples of the best taking each other on in fair and regulated competition. However, it seems that either getting to that level or indeed keeping your hands clean on that path is one filled with dangerous excess. And number 1, the negative impact video games have on you. So here we are. We've talked at length about how the video game industry sees your bank account as their own in multiple forms and how they will try and take every avenue they can to follow excess at all costs. But what about the impact video games have on us outside of these factors? Well, not to sugarcoat it in the slightest, it does make for some pretty worrying reading. Video game addiction is a very real and very concerning threat to certain individuals and can have a huge negative impact on their emotional and physical well-being. None of this is helped by aggressive gameplay loops that seek to reward players at every turn, thereby encouraging them to spend longer and longer with the title in question. By feeding them a level up, a loot box, hell, a reward of any kind, these games stimulate our brain in such a manner that it triggers a rush of endorphins, making us form a pretty unhealthy connection that playing this game makes us feel good. Forming a habitual relationship with a video game can result in us spending longer and longer stints with it, foregoing regular sleep patterns, becoming agitated when we lose because this denies us that feeling we crave, and of course, spending money in order to get better items, equipment, or other digital finery. Video game addiction can ruin lives, with people becoming so tied to a title that they push others away. And there have been multiple documented cases of divorce and breakups thanks to prioritizing video games over real-life situations. In excess, this escapism can become dangerous, and if you need a final, morbid full stop on the matter, in 2015 a man died in an internet cafe in Taiwan from exhaustion after playing video games for 3 days straight. It's pretty grim, isn't it? And there we go, my friends. That was another entry into the 7 deadly video game sins, this time on gluttony. I hope that you got something from this, and let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. If you want to chat to me further about all things to do with video games, TV, wrestling, films, whatever else, then you can do so over on Twitter at RetroJ, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice. It's my personal gaming channel where I stream every single Wednesday and Sunday. Great to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Today, obviously, we detailed about gluttony, about excess, about taking things too far. And I just want to make sure that before things go too far in any negative sense in your life, that you stop, take a moment, and allow yourself to reflect on your situations. Remember, you are in control of your own life. Do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise. Use that moment of reflection to look at things in your life and ask yourself, do I need help with things? Because that is completely okay to ask for help from friends, family, professionals in the support industry, because these people care about you and they want you to do well. So take a break, be kind to yourself, and then go out there and absolutely smash it, you big ledge. As always, I've been Jules, you have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.